Before we dive in, if you're a jewelry or product-based business owner trying to make sense of all this tariff talk, I've got something for you. I created a free guide just for independent brands like yours. It's called Tariffs, Pricing, and Your Independent Jewelry Brand. And it breaks down exactly how to adapt your pricing, manage suppliers, and stay profitable without the panic. You'll learn what the new 2025 trade shifts actually mean and how to protect your margins while still attracting your dream customers. Grab your free copy now at flourishthriveacademy.com/tariffs. That's TARIFFS. But don't worry, we also have a link in the show notes and we'll redirect misspellings too. Now, let's dive into this episode. To the Thrive by Design podcast, just a few weeks before we rebrand into Creatives Rule the World. And I wanted to, in particular, do this episode today, especially for all the jewelry business owners who are out there and anyone selling a physical product who's worried about the tariffs that are potentially going to be imposed on countries that import into the US, in the US, or export into the US, if I'm saying that right. Now, this is not a political post. I want to be very clear about this. I'm trying to be as neutral and objective as possible and to share with you what I know about why these tariffs are being enforced, or why they're even being proposed, I should say, and what that looks like to the jewelry community. And then also, in addition to that, how you can prepare for tariffs if they actually do go into place, and maybe looking at the bright side of what could potentially happen as a result of that. So I am Tracy Matthews. I'm the Chief Visionary Officer of a company called Flourish and Thrive Academy. And I have several businesses where I'm supporting business owners in helping them grow to 6- and 7-figure businesses. And in this episode, I'm going to be talking a little bit more about why this matters, because tariffs, let's just face it, they affect pricing, sourcing, and profitability for all business owners. And small businesses in particular will probably be the most vulnerable. So I wanted to mention that. We all know that, but you're a small business. And the reason why you're listening to this podcast is to get information that can help you be resilient and help you continue to keep going, even when times feel tough. So what I'm going to be talking about today are the countries that are going to be most effective, or where exports are coming in to the US. This is primarily focused on the US tariffs, and I'm going to explain a little bit more about my understanding of why the tariffs are in place. We're going to be talking about how much tariffs are going to potentially increase your costs as a business owner. And I keep saying potentially because there is a 90-day extension and we don't technically know if they're going to go into place. And then what smart brands are actually doing right now to prepare themselves and their customers to think outside of the box when it comes to, running a business, right? Being a smart business owner, which I think is the most important part of this. So in 2025, President Trump introduced a new tariff policy. Everyone's been freaking out about this and thinking that he's trying to be a dictator or all these things, but that's not my understanding of why this is all happening. The baseline tariff that he has proposed is 10% on nearly all imports, which are effective April 2025, but hold tight because there have been a ban on these. And then reciprocal tariffs on specific countries with higher rates who have been imposing tariffs on us over time. And so I'm going to explain a little bit more about my understanding about what that means. Trump has put a 90-day pause on the tariffs that went into effect April 9th, 2025. And this episode is going to be, I think, airing close to the last week of April, second to last week of April. And there is a temporary freeze right now on tariffs for most countries. China is the exception. And for anyone who's following the trade wars with China and knows anything about Chinese manufacturing, I know that the jewelry industry, especially people who manufacture in mass, or they do costume jewelry or have certain components composed in China, or even their packaging, or if you're sourcing things like stainless steel chain for permanent jewelry, et cetera, like that this might significantly affect you. Significant tariffs have been imposed on China, partially because they impose significant tariffs on us, on tariffs going into the country. And then there's other geopolitical things going on there where the Chinese manufacturers have been undercutting, small businesses for a very long time and knocking them off. And we see this, for example, on Etsy, where part of the brilliance of what was happening on Etsy for so long was that all these small designers could go and sell their products and like make a living doing what they loved. And then all of a sudden Etsy allowed everyone on. And now Chinese manufacturers and people importing crappy products from China, not all products from China are crappy, but like lower quality products from China, could now undercut these independent designers. So, we look at it from all lenses. And what I want to try to create is a 360 view of like what this actually looks like. It's not necessarily a bad thing for certain business owners. And I know that for some people, you will be affected. But for other people, this might also give you a competitive edge because now Chinese manufacturing or people importing jewelry from China, and trying to sell on platforms like Etsy or Amazon or any of these other places, now the prices are going to be higher and it gives you an opportunity to actually win out because people definitely want to be buying US made products who are living in the United States. And I know that this is a global audience listening to this, but I do want to call that out because it's something that's being overlooked and it's a very important thing that we all need to be thinking about as we're going through this process. I want to talk a little bit more about what the tariffs are. So as I mentioned earlier, there's a 10% baseline tariffs on almost all imported goods, including jewelry, that went into effect April 5th. That did get a pause on that April 9th. And what happened when that pause happened was that many of the countries, let me backtrack for a second. He also opposed, President Trump also opposed a reciprocal tariff on targeting countries with unbalanced or imbalanced trade policies or higher tariffs on US goods, meaning we have no tariff or a low tariff for goods coming into the country from that country. And then, but the goods that we ship into that country have significantly higher tariffs. I know one of the things that I heard was Canadian imports or exports of steel, they were tariffing our steel 200%, where we weren't tariffing them nearly at that rate. And so that was just one example that came to mind. I know it has nothing to do with the jewelry industry, but there is a reason about why some of these things are happening. So there are reciprocal tariffs imposed on countries who have higher tariffs on similar or the same goods going each way. Tariffs are ranging from different rates from 17% in Israel to over 50% in China. And one of the reasons why I understand that President Trump wanted to create these tariffs was to encourage people to buy not only in the United States, but to also make it a better deal for the US. Tariffs are being used as an economic strategy to correct trade imbalances that have been happening to US manufacturing and to stimulate internal US job growth. The policy is driven by a mix of retaliation, rebalancing, and rebuilding. So these are the core pillars of what I understand are happening here. And that policy of trying to get manufacturing back in the US was one of the core policies. Now, one of the things that has come up was this these words are hard to say, reciprocal trade fairness. The US argues that many countries impose significantly higher tariffs on American goods than the US does on theirs. And so for those of you who don't understand that piece of it, that's actually a real thing. And if you don't understand how that is actually putting the US in a bad position, let's say we have a massive export of a certain type of good and we send a lot of goods into a country and they're buying our goods at a lower rate, but then if they're shipping other things into our country and we're having to buy it at a higher rate, it's actually not a good deal for United States citizens. And so part of my understanding, and I keep saying my understanding because this is all something that I'm learning just like you are, is that the reason for the reciprocal trade fairness was to create a level playing field where we could get back to a free trade agreement. Because you see a lot of things being floated around, like they're trying to abolish free trade, but we don't really have free trade. And I think a lot of people don't understand that, is that there are a lot of tariffs coming in and out of the country that we don't know. And I know this anytime I've tried to ship. For instance, I had customers back in the day in the UK and in Australia, and when they got the goods from shipping my jewelry, they had to pay sometimes like a 50% tariff on the product that was coming in. And neither of us actually had an idea that was happening until well after the jewelry was paid for and shipped. And for people who are on a budget or they're trying to like purchase something within a specific budget, that's actually like a huge surprise for them. And it truly affects, American companies, right, who are trying to ship things outside to international clients. The new tariffs, as I mentioned, aim to create a level playing field by matching or exceeding foreign tariff rates. Now, Trump has called this economic self-defense to counter long-term imbalances, and I'm going to create a PDF of this, of everything I'm talking about here with the sources that I'm citing. I don't want to go into the weeds here, but we've cited sources from National Jewelers and many other spots who have done their journalistic due diligence. And I'll mention all of those at the end. But President Trump has called this economic self-defense. And one of the reasons for this is that we in the United States are in a huge, let's say, deficit crisis. Over the past 20 years, probably since the early 2000s, our deficit keeps rising every single year. And we're getting into a really tricky economic position with how much debt we're paying off. And I don't know the specifics of this. Jason was trying to explain it to me, but we had some big interest payment that we had to make. And the Fed wasn't lowering interest rate. And one of the Fed is the organization that controls finance rates in the United States. And it is not owned by the government. It's not regulated by the government. It's regulated by the globalist families who are like the Rothschild, the Rockefellers, et cetera, who are those big, families kind of like ruling the world. And it's not actually ruled by any of the countries. They're central banks. And it becomes really tricky because countries like the United States become indebted to them, and it puts them, and then those central banks end up selling off the debt to places like China or other places where there's no control. And so it gets us in this vicious cycle of not being able to get out of debt. And when you're spending, this is the same in a business. Like if you're spending more than you make and you're incurring big debt, there's only so long that cycle can go until you actually have to bankrupt, right? There's only so long that cycle can go. And so we need to do something about this deficit in the debt, because if we don't, the United States is going to be in big trouble. And by taxing imports heavily that are coming into the United States, it generates revenue without having to raise income taxes on US citizens. And so this is a really important thing that we don't realize, is that if we tax imports, right, the people who buy those things, yes, the tariff will be passed along in the price of the goods, but it means that families don't necessarily get more taken out of their income tax, and you get to choose how you spend your money. So if you decide to buy something and it has a tariff, then you're making that choice. And one of the things that I've heard, and I'm sure that this is just like a rumor that is going around, is that Trump actually wants to abolish income tax to help American families like get ahead and get back on their feet, because a lot of people have been struggling for the past 4 or 5 years since COVID, especially with all the money that's been printed and all of the jobs that have been eliminated and stuff like that. And so once again, this is my understanding of it, and you're welcome to challenge me, or I don't want to say challenge me because I'm just learning. I'm not here to get in any arguments. That's not what it's all about. But more than anything, maybe educate me if you understand it in a different way than that. Also, one of the big things that has really been lost in the United States, which was a core foundation of the middle class, was manufacturing and supply chains for having affordable manufacturing actually done here in the United States. We used to be one of the main manufacturers, for instance, of jewelry in Rhode Island. There was a huge industry there, and I know a lot of the factories have gone out, and there's still lots of manufacturing happening there. But I'm mentioning that because we used to have a ton of manufacturing here for different types of industries that has since gone away because we were being undercut by places like China. And I understand this on a deep level, because when I was shipping $100,000 orders to stores like Anthropologie back in the day, one of the only ways that we could meet their price points that they wanted to hit was by sourcing things in China. And so one of the strategies here is to create incentives for companies to actually bring production back to the United States, to create lower tariff options and lower tariff regions so that we have manufacturing here, so that we can have a standard supply chain for all different industries. So one of the things that I think is really interesting is that I live in Arizona, and Jason mentioned this to me the other day, and now I'm seeing it all over Instagram, probably because Instagram was listening to my phone. But Apple is bringing a new manufacturing plant here, or a new facility here to Arizona, which means that a lot of countries or companies, excuse me, are reshoring their manufacturing back in the United States, which is actually very good for the US economy. And the sources for this information are the White House statement on tariffs on April 2025 and Bloomberg Apple moves manufacturing to the US. As I mentioned, I'm trying to state the sources here so that we are all on the same page. Obviously, the jewelry industry sources a lot of materials internationally. Sure, we do have raw materials and minerals that do come from United States resources, and a lot of them come from other places, right? And so China is one of the countries, their current tariff rate is up to 54% on finished jewelry and gemstones. I know that that was raised, or I remember reading earlier in one of the sources that this is raised temporarily to 125%. And that keeps going up, probably because of their reciprocal trade situation that's going on with that. I can't claim to know too much about that, but I do understand that this is a play to try to make it a little bit fairer for things that are being imported for China to also lower the tariffs that are coming in from China. India has a 27% tariff, and we get a lot of diamonds and gold and silver jewelry from India. I know that I've had things made in India, and India is a great tool or resource to source beautiful jewelry because they have such a jewelry rich society. And, you know, it's like you think of a lot of these Indian weddings and some of the, you know, the culture of India, Indian culture that is centered so around jewelry. And so many of my suppliers are from India. Thailand, 36 to 37% tariffs. A lot of our rubies, sapphires, and finished pieces come from Thailand. I know that there's a lot of stone setting that's done in Thailand, et cetera. And so a lot of manufacturing there. Vietnam is also a big manufacturer of jewelry and watches. They have a 46% tariff right now. Botswana, 37% tariff. These are all rough and polished diamonds. Switzerland, luxury watches and fine jewelry. And I know a lot of diamonds also come through Antwerp. So that's a 31% tariff. Israel has a 17% tariff where a lot of diamonds come through. And then the EU, 20% tariff, assorted fine and custom jewelry. And I know that there are other countries where we do source materials. I just saw someone who is saying, like, one of the ways that I'm avoiding tariffs, we're going to talk more about this in a minute, is to go straight to the source and flying to where your suppliers are to just buy directly from the manufacturers to avoid some of the tariffs. So let's talk a little bit more about how the industry is being impacted, because I think this is an important conversation. First, we're going to see increased costs across the supply chain. So tariffs are paid at the border, they're passed on to retailers, and then they're eventually passed on to customers at the end of the day. And cost-sensitive categories like engagement rings, tennis bracelets, things that have a lower margin, especially things with diamonds, like real diamonds in it, I should say, are going to be affected significantly. Also, I find this interesting, and I want to see how this actually plays out, because diamonds, there's this huge controversy going on because of all the lab-created diamonds that have been coming in from China. And, you know, I'm always questioning a little bit about, you know, is a lab-created diamond actually more sustainable than a real diamond that's mined from the earth? And, you know, we can go and debate about this, but the greenhouse gases and the energy that's used to actually create a lab diamond might actually exceed what happens from when we dig diamonds out of the earth. And I know that the movie Blood Diamonds, there's been a lot of things that have come into place since that time to protect the diamond industry and to protect people so that we're not actually, you know, mining blood diamonds and all those things, et cetera. But that's an interesting thing to think about. Like, is one of the things that have happened, like lab creative diamonds have reduced the desire for natural diamonds. And so will this like kind of shift the pendulum and get back to center where they're not as necessarily as cheap or as affordable? And, you know, 20-year-olds who are getting engaged aren't wearing fake 5-carat rings. You know, it's interesting. It's an interesting thing to think about, because I've seen so many people with these massive diamonds on their hand, and you look at them and you're kind of like, how could you, you're thinking like, you just started your life, how could you afford such a big stone? But a lot of it is because people are just sourcing, you know, these lab created stones or moissanite or something else like that. Number two, there's a lot of pressure on small businesses in particular. So Large brands, they can shift production to absorb costs. They can move things around. But independent jewelry designers are going to be affected because we might see a squeeze in margins. We might see layoffs. We might see some closures. That is not destined. I just want to say this. It's not destined, and it's something that can be avoided. We just need to be thinking about how we're manufacturing products. And in fact, one of the things that I talked a lot about in Laying the Foundation program that was one of the core things about designing jewelry in my module about designing jewelry and pricing and all of this stuff. And I'm going to share a little bit more about that in a second. Is I talk about when in 2008, when, there was a shift, right? There was this huge shift to fast fashion, cheap jewelry, because fine jewelry got expensive. The rising price of gold, the rising price of metals, like we didn't really know what to do. And we had to make a shift. And so the industry shifted towards this fast fashion, which was all basically like big costume jewelry that was super cheap, sourced from China. And it created this huge thing. And so when people were creating product and then the price of the metals, like fine metals and everything, started to increase, and they tried to like do the same thing that they were always doing, but the price of the market would not bear what they were creating. I remember this. Then it became hard to actually sell those items. And so one of the things that I learned to do was to reverse engineer. And this is like thinking strategically about your design process. If something is going to include, all these materials, like how do you reverse engineer to reduce the cost of your materials to keep your product still look and feel the same, but also fit into a price point that is in the mind's eye of what the consumer wants from you. And that's a really important strategy that we're going to talk about when I get to the section about pricing and how to actually handle this thing. We're also going to see probably a supply chain shakeup. Businesses are going to shift sourcing potentially to Mexico, Sri Lanka, Indonesia, Bangladesh, other countries that don't have similar tariffs on the US. Countries like India and Thailand may lose US market share, pivoting to EU and Asia. So this is could potentially change the supply chain a little bit. It's a little bit of a bummer because I know a lot of materials come from India, and India has like one of the best assortment of stones. It's really a mineral rich country, and it's one of the reasons why people go there. And most of my suppliers are from India, or back in the day were from India. And so it'll be interesting to see how that shifts, if there aren't ways that we can negotiate and come to the table and actually create a win-win situation for all of this. It's interesting, as I've been doing this, the interview that I did before recording this podcast with my friend Selena Sue, and we were talking about rich relationships and developing rich relationships with other people. And one of the things that she was talking about was a win-win relationship, meaning or win-win situation where both parties are supporting each other. And so I know that ultimately that's what we're really going for, is to try to create these relationships with these other countries where it can be beneficial to both sides, right? So the specific product categories that are going to be the most effective and affected are going to be diamonds, mined and lab-grown diamonds, because from India and China, there's going to be big price hikes potentially if the tariffs do go into place. Gold, silver, and platinum jewelry, because we already are seeing an increase in fine metal prices. So having an additional 30% duty in some cases could significantly increase prices there. And then also imitation jewelry and pearls, because we're starting to shrink budget-friendly options. So for instance, it's not necessarily a bad thing to independent designers, because if factories from China can't compete with an indie brand, an indie handmade brand for something that looks the same, then the independent designer might start growing actually in that case. And that's a pretty cool thing to think about, right? All right, let's talk about how you can adapt. So first things first, don't panic. I really want you to know that these changes are definitely disruptive, but they can also be an opportunity to rethink your pricing strategy, improve your messaging, and build a more resilient business in the long term. More than anything, we don't really know what's going to happen. One thing that we know about President Trump from his days on The Apprentice is that he's very direct, and like he a lot of times would get what he wants from a business standpoint. And so when we say that, a lot of the countries that have been, affected came to the table and said, let's negotiate. And that's like all he wanted, because we need to figure out a way that we can reduce this deficit and the debt that we're incurring as a country, and also make it beneficial for United States citizens and get this country back on track. So one of the immediate mindset shifts that I really want to impart on you is, number one, stay calm, be strategic. Businesses that adapt the fastest, not the cheapest, will actually come out ahead. So don't stress about that. Tariffs also are not forever, but the habits you build now set your brand up for long-term success. And I want you to use this moment to get creative with your sourcing, your marketing, and your storytelling so that you can start thinking outside of the box of how you can appeal to the right customers in a better way. So one of the things that I really want you guys to start thinking about right now, number one, is to rethink your pricing strategy. Now, you don't necessarily have to do anything right away, but if you are designing anything in silver, in gold, in platinum, and the prices have gone up for most of those categories, then what I would want you to start thinking about is go back and do a pricing audit, make sure that your products are priced properly, and make sure that you have enough margin currently in your pricing strategy to make a profit, right? Don't just absorb the costs. You're going to run out of cash flow. Make sure that you're pricing properly. And then focus on the why behind your product pricing, right? We want to talk about how it's made, the quality, that it's limited availability, ethical sourcing, the symbolic meaning, like how the jewelry is going to make someone feel, how it fits into their life, like really creating that emotional connection to your pieces and delivering value about what it is that you do. And then also avoid framing your product around price or discounting too often. You start to train your customers to expect value instead of markdowns. And so really communicating that value and sharing the fact that you are a small business and you are so grateful for the people who are supporting your small business. And the way that they can support you is by really leaning into buying handmade brands or these smaller brands. So let's talk a little bit about a strategy to roll out. And I'm considering doing a pricing and positioning workshop. If that's something that you want to hear more about, shoot me an Instagram DM over at @flourish_thrive and just send me a message. Tracy, I would love for you to do a pricing and positioning workshop. And if I hear from enough of you, I might consider doing that, which is great. Or you can reach out to me on my personal Instagram. I am Tracy Matthews, and let's chat over there. So definitely roll out your pricing, your increases gradually, and start with new collections or best sellers. You can go back and reposition your previous items if you need to. And then make sure that you communicate this with your customers and your client base. So one of the favorite strategies that I have for this is to notify people before you actually raise your prices and say, hey, due to the rising metal prices and potential tariff increase, we're probably going to have to be raising prices, once all of these things, or if all these things go into effect. I wanted to give you an opportunity to buy my products now. And this is a great way for you to generate even some quick cash in your business before you have to raise prices. So that communication plan can be really good. And then other things that you can say and language that you can use are things like, due to rising materials and import costs, we're adjusting our prices to continue delivering the quality and integrity that you expect. Or we believe in radical transparency. So instead of cutting corners, we're choosing to maintain our craftsmanship. And that means adjusting our prices slightly. Educate the customers on what is going on. And also continue to thank them for supporting your small business. So the next thing that you can do is diversify your supply chain. Find other types of suppliers. Are there other places that you can source? Can you source domestically? Which countries are now high risk due to tariffs? Explore different alternatives sourcing from low tariff countries like Mexico, Sri Lanka, Indonesia, Bangladesh, if you can. And then, as I mentioned, source domestically when possible and consider local casters, bench jewelers, places that you can source from here to reduce your shipping costs and to avoid duties in the long term. Also, go to the source if you can. Take a vacation and a trip and go straight there and source directly from your vendors if you are importing domestically, or if you're buying supplies from people in other countries, I guess is the best way to put it. Now, another thing I wanted to talk about was managing your cash flow. Since tariffs have to be paid up front when goods are cleared in customs, this can strain liquidity, especially if you're sourcing directly from a resource that's overseas. A lot of us source from suppliers who are based in the US, but we're going to see an increase in the supply chain there. So Some strategies are to make sure that you are batching in smaller orders and ordering more frequently. Negotiate better terms with your suppliers so that you can pay over time instead of having to pay everything up front. And then adjust your reorder points and plan for the future a little bit further in advance, especially for the holiday season, so that you're ready and prepared. I know that one of my clients, I know that she sources parts of her key components from China and she can't have them made anywhere else, at least not right now. And so she has a shipment coming in and she's like holding her breath. She's like, I don't know. I have no idea what to expect. I'm nervous and trying to just stay calm and all of that. So all the things that you can do is just manage your cash flow smartly and see what happens. And then once again, communicate this with your customers because transparency builds trust. You can use email. You can talk about this on Instagram. You can have on-site product pages to explain the shifts, tell your story behind the pricing, and share just like what's going on. So especially, I was talking with Chelsea and she's like, I'm not affected by tariffs at all. And I'm curious, like, how is she running a business where her business is not affected by tariffs at all? She does design lower price point jewelry, but that's something to think about. Like all of her suppliers are based here in the US. And one of the things is when you support domestic suppliers, and that definitely helps you with your carbon footprint and all the other things that are involved with importing from far away. And then another thing that I want to talk about in this communication strategy, when you're communicating with your customer, reinforce value over volume, heirloom quality, symbolic significance, limited editions. Like the more that you can talk about the value of what you offer, the better it is. Now, another thing that I want you to think about right now is to start finding backup vendors and multiple resources that you can buy. So even if you're not ready to shift your sourcing yet, start building relationships with new suppliers now. Request samples, get quotes, test out new lead times, test out different opportunities. I'm working with one of my VIP clients right now, and they're a little bit newer to the jewelry industry. And he was asking me questions like, what kind of chain should I source and supply? And, one of the things that I always recommend is like, get samples, like test things, see if these are the things that you like. Cause sometimes even just ordering like a chain that is slightly smaller or slightly less dense can be a fine replacement to something that you're already sourcing, as long as the quality is still strong. So there's like a lot of different things that you can do to get into that place. And if you want to learn more about this and learn a little bit more about how you can find better suppliers and think strategically through how you're designing pieces, once again, reach out to me. I'm going to be offering a download of this episode once the episode goes live. So reach out and we'll share just that resource with you. It's just a jeweler's guide to tariffs and pricing, etc. Here's a little bit more about what I want you to watch out for over the next 90 days. This is a 90-day pause. It's temporary, but the idea is that during this 90-day pause, negotiations will happen and people won't be affected. So earlier in this episode, I said, do not panic. We don't totally know what is going to happen with the tariffs. It could be anything right now, right? And the country that is the most affected are people who are importing things from China. And that might not change in the short term, but hopefully we can find some ways to bring things to the bargaining chips. This tariff, the 90-day pause on the tariffs ends or expires in July. And there's a huge potential that could be extended while things are negotiated. It could also be escalated. We don't know. Or it could be replaced with something else completely. So all of this is a negotiation and we're trying to figure out what's happening. And then ongoing negotiations, as I mentioned, might change the tariff rates and also the structure again. So I really encourage you to subscribe to trade news updates, like watch National Jeweler and some of these other JCK, some of these other news publications that are talking about what's going on in the jewelry industry to stay informed. Build agility into your operations, meaning are there ways that you can infuse and use AI tools? We have an announcement that's coming up really soon where we're going to be supporting you and creating AI assistants for your business. More on that soon. But there's a lot of ways that you can streamline your operations and your flow to take to become more efficient, which increases productivity. It increases how your business is running, how your operation is running, and all of that. And then also join communities for more information. You can take masterclasses like things that I'm hosting. You can also jump into other communities where they're talking about these things, which is a great opportunity for you to do. And so I'm turning this podcast into an amazing download. It's not available yet on Instagram, but you can shoot me a DM. It's the Jeweler's Guide to Navigating Tariffs and what this means for you. And so if you want to download this, head on over to flourishthriveacademy.com/tariffs. Tariffs is spelled TARIFFS. We're also going to include some of the misspelling links. Head on over there, download this guide, and you can also click the link in the show notes so that you can, once it's available, so that you can grab that and download it right there. And yeah, stay posted. We have a lot of really exciting things coming up. You may have noticed that I've taken a pause from like really promoting any of our programs or courses. There's good reason for that. And I'm really excited about what's coming in the pipeline, because what I know that you all need is something that is going to get you results fast. And that's what we're building. And I'm very excited about it. I'm very excited about the future of Flourish and Thrive Academy and how it's going to support not just jewelry business owners, but other people in the product and physical product space and luxury product space, because it's going to literally be changing the game. And more than anything, just helping support you and having the confidence to put yourself out there. Because at the end of the day, all of this is not the first time something like this has happened. And I think that political environment, especially in the United States right now, I don't know about I'm sure it's other parts in the world, that is true too. Everything's really inflamed. Everything's really sensationalized. It's really hard to understand, like, what is the real truth? And me being someone who questions authority and also questions everything that I hear. When something sounds off or there's misalignment somewhere or it doesn't make sense, I'm always asking to go a layer deeper. I'm not actually a high fact finder, but I am a curious person. And so I typically don't take things for face value, especially things that are charged, because I know that one of the ways that we are controlled as a society is by creating fear, and one of the ways that the media controls society is by creating fear and by getting people to follow along a narrative. And so I'm always questioning what's next, because we don't really know what's going to happen. Hopefully this works the way that the president intends, and that we do have tariffs that are reduced or reciprocal tariffs, so that it's tariff for tariff, and like the countries are actually working in a way that are supporting each other, and we're getting back to what is truly a free trade agreement. And that's not what we have right now, and that's not what the media is saying. So I want to mention that, because I'm not here to get on either side. I'm not a very political person. I'm a very neutral person. I like to say I'm Switzerland over here, but I do like to know the truth. And that's the most important part of this. I think we all need to know the truth and what's really happening, not some sensationalized, inflammatory story that's designed to scare people or freak them out or make them want to shut their businesses down without being strategic. Because what I will say is that in 2008, when the market crashed and a lot of businesses were wiped out, the businesses that didn't freak out and become afraid were the ones that thrived. They were the ones that continued. And I remember just seeing I was at a trade show a couple of years ago. I was talking to this girl, and she said, it's so crazy because I started my business in 2008 and I had a great year, because it's just a perspective shift. Like, if you're not affected by something and you're not feeling it and you're not in a state of fight or flight, you actually have an opportunity, or fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. You have an opportunity to really step up and be strategic and curious about what's going on. So I encourage you all to be curious, ask better questions, do your research. There's great research tools now. ChatGPT has deep research on it. Perplexity has deep research where you can really get to the bottom of where this information is coming from. Please, if I can tell you anything, stop watching mainstream media. It's designed to scare you. And it's also not factually based. If you follow the money on those mainstream media resources, you'll see that they are owned by the powers that be. And I'll leave it at that so that this podcast episode doesn't get shut down. But if you follow the money about who is funding and paying for the salaries on these people who are saying everyone's terrible, then you will have a better understanding about who's really running the show. And so be curious, ask better questions, and, question everything. Zay Star is clapping. Amen. Yes, this is true. It's like people, I think people get lazy because they're so driven by emotion, which I certainly am. But if you can get out of that emotion and start to think of okay, be curious, why is this happening? That doesn't make sense, and question it. you might find a different kind of answer. And so there you go. Anyway, thank you for listening today. I'm so excited for this episode to go live. I am thrilled to be supporting you all on this journey. When the episode goes live, we're going to have a download with the information that's in this episode that you can grab, and I'll have that linked in the show notes, etc. All the things. Ciao for now, everyone. Thank you. If today's episode reminded you how much you have on your plate as a jewelry or product-based founder, here's something that's going to change everything for you. Imagine if your content, emails, and launch strategy for your collections could literally be done in minutes and still sound like you. What if you could plan your weeks and months and know exactly what you should be doing to reach your goals? Well, that's why I built Desire AI, and that's what I built it to do. It's your 24/7 marketing assistant and business coach, trained to speak in your voice, write like your brand, and help you show up consistently without the burnout. Whether you're writing product drop emails or mapping out your next launch or trying to post on Instagram at 10 p.m., Desire AI is right there with you. If you have a burning question about your jewelry business or what to do, and it's 2 o'clock in the morning and you need an instant answer, well, guess what? Desire AI is for you. This AI tool is going to be a game changer for your business. And I would love to invite you to get on the wait list right now. Head on over to flourishthriveacademy.com/Desire AI. We are going to be releasing very soon a very limited number of seats to this game-changing tool that is literally going to revolutionize the jewelry industry and the product industry. So whether you have a luxe product, you're selling another physical product or handmade goods, or you sell jewelry, this will change your life. Your brand deserves to be seen, sought after, and selling daily without costing you your time or your voice. Get on the wait list now.